revenues. If it's new or expanded service. So that's something we might want to consider. The capital costs associated with newer expanded transit service, so the buses can be paid for with TIF revenue from any TIF district. So the transit-oriented designation is really specific to if you want to also pay some operating costs of newer expanded service.
So if we hired a company to come in to do it, that would...
Well, so the way it works with hiring another company is that we would ask for what amount of the fee we pay is what they use for capital and what they use for operating, so that we could figure out what part we can use TIP revenue.
This is a regional operation.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't really take advantage of them over here.
Right.
It's
So
not something that I've been playing with.
So in either case, whether we go forward with an actual transit-oriented TIF or just some other district, we could add capital costs of newer expanded service to that. Okay. And the next bullet is omnibus districts. I think what I'm hearing is you would be considering doing a downtown omnibus TIF district. And the omnibus designation is really what allows you to create credit enhancement agreements for parcels within a larger district, so that you measure the assessed value and increases parcel by parcel, as opposed to, or you can parcel by parcel, as opposed to the whole district. And omnibus is just the name that DECD decided to use for these things. But a lot of area-wide districts and downtown districts are omnibus districts. And you can, in the development program, say...
At the front door, I think someone's trying to get in.
Oh.
Sorry.
So what we would likely say in a development program is that the council would reserve the right to enter into credit enhancement agreements with future developers or companies following a public hearing of up to some % reimbursement. And then the council will be authorized going forward to take those applications and locally approve them without having to go through the state review process.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I'm going to answer that phone. That'll be one way to
Do you want me to
solve the
get it? They probably have a TIF question.
Hello? Hello? Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
All this stuff is complicated.
Any questions on these special types? Nothing? I don't know about affordable housing, if this is something that you're interested in talking about. It's really meant to facilitate credit enhancement agreements with affordable housing, sort of large-scale affordable housing developers. So just to have it on the radar. But I don't know that you have any of those proposals coming forward. The next few slides are really just meant to show you the process. So this first slide shows you the first stage, which is really you develop the development program document, you draw the district on a map, determine what kinds of special characteristics you want to include. Do you want it to be omnibus, downtown, all those things. And that would primarily be done with staff and then present, get some feedback, make some changes, you know, that kind of process is what I would imagine. And it happens in most municipalities. The next step would be the municipality has to hold a public hearing. There's a 10-day public hearing notice ahead of that hearing. The complete document package has to be ready and available for the public when that notice gets published. And you know, we have to submit all that evidence to the state for approval. Following the public hearing, well then you hold the public hearing. We always have to provide actually a very detailed record of what happens at that hearing. So you have to describe what people say in their comments. And DECD will review them and make sure that we answer the questions that they ask correctly. So it's a different level of scrutiny than most public hearings that you'll see. And then moving on, after the public hearing, in this community, there would be a vote of the council whether to approve or not to approve the proposed district. That can occur on the same night as the public hearing, and I can't remember how we did it in the past here. Kind of depends on how you all feel, if is appropriate. Sometimes it makes sense to wait and have you be able to digest what the public has commented on about it, but you don't need to have that extra time. And once that legislative body vote occurs, then we prepare the application for submission. This next slide actually adds in, and I don't know that you have a policy in place that applies to TIF districts. A growing number of municipalities have a TIF policy, and we can talk further about that. There also sometimes are local ordinances or charters that will require you to have like a first reading, second reading, so I always put that in just in case there's something locally that's required in the process. But I think the other thing that comes up is if you have a TIF policy, you want to make sure you're following that as well. A lot of municipalities who have TIF policies, they're really dedicated more to the processing of a credit enhancement agreement application, sort of what factors you need to consider. And some communities put a cap on the percentage reimbursement that can be offered and that kind of thing. So and we can talk about that. Following that, there's a review by the commissioner of the application, and we often receive some comments from staff and questions, and we can usually take care of those relatively easily when the time comes. And then for a downtown TIF district, we would also be waiting at that point for the downtown TIF district departmental advisories that I mentioned before the commissioner would issue the final approval. And that approval means that the TIF district is now active, and then DECD is pretty much out of the picture, and it's a local process. Yes, go ahead.
So within the town of Oakland, the final decision maker on whether or not to approve TIF falls with the town meeting?
Council.
With the council. And who then determines how the money is spent within the TIF? Is that the council?
That would be the council also.
So
Unless I develop a TIF committee that would advise the council on it.
So the TIF is done by the council. It and the financing of the TIF never makes it to the
Town meeting.
town meeting.
We'll have a
Okay.
public hearing where the taxpayers will be allowed to do it.
Yes.
Now, I remember when I was working with you all before, that approval process of a TIF district definitely rests with the council as opposed to the town meeting. Does the town meeting here go through the budget approval process? Is that what they weigh in on annually?
Right, it's just the budget.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we can have a further conversation about, what appropriate involvement there should be in the expenditures of TIF revenues.
I asked because I'm the new kid and I wasn't here when Oakland did its previous TIF.
Yeah, I think, really in the last, you raise an important question because there has been increased attention on that particular question. I think nationally, one of the criticisms of TIFs is that it has the potential to create what people might view as not private, but sort of hidden pot of money that some few people get to decide how it's spent. Obviously, your process is going to be out in the open in the public meetings, and there are things you can do to make sure that that's not sort of a criticism that could come here. But I think it's important to know that you are supposed to go through a budgeting process that is public for those funds on an annual basis. So I think it's something to keep in mind, and we can talk further about. It's definitely been more of an issue in questions in the last few years of my practice in Maine than it had been before. I think just
It would be advisable, wouldn't it, for me to establish a committee that would be an advisement committee for the council of taxpayers within the community as a TIF. We don't have anything established like that. If we move forward with the TIF district for downtown, in my opinion, that would be a way to kind of settle things down a little bit.
yeah, there are quite a few communities that have done that, particularly when they get to a certain critical mass of TIF districts, and then the committee can both inform how best to use those revenues in accordance with the development programs for the respective districts, and also, you know, what's our economic development plan and goals for the future? What are we missing as opportunities? And then they can inform this council going forward on some of those larger strategic issues. And sometimes a member of the council serve as a liaison and that kind of thing for that committee. Something to consider. Any other questions? I think the only other couple of things on my slides, I already talked a little bit about the potential for a TIF policy. I've kind of evolved in my own thinking about them. I mean, I have felt for a long time that I had seen policies get created that then some proposal or development would come forward and it would require the community to change the policy in order to hear that application, because it just wasn't something they had anticipated. And so it felt to me like the policies were not really working so great. But maybe some would argue that they weren't working great because they got changed and they really should have stayed in place and prevented something from happening that shouldn't have. So, I mean, I think that policies, if they're written in a relatively flexible way, can be helpful guides for you know, future counselors who come in and are trying to get their head around what parameters and what the goals are and that kind of thing. But a lot of communities don't have them. You're not required to have them. So I just thought I'd add that.
We're certainly not overloaded with TIFs in the town of Oakland.
Yeah.
We've got one for the town, one for Carrier, and this would be the third if we move forward with it.
Yeah, and if you could imagine applications for credit enhancement agreements out of a downtown omnibus district in the future, it might be something to think about. But I think as long as you apply a rigorous kind of process each time an application comes forward, you don't necessarily need the policy to achieve that.
So I got a question for you. We have one building that's probably the most significant building we have in the town of Oakland. And there's been a couple of people who've been interested in purchasing this property. One of them backed out, the other one was interested, but only interested if we can come up with a credit enhancement agreement to help with the purchase and to reestablish its life. We don't have any additional value, but if somebody bought that and they put $1 million into the building, that's going to increase the value. We had that TIF district in place, we'd be able to capture the additional value over what it was before we started and the $1 million worth of investment that was put in there. Would bring a value up on the building. Is it safe to assume that that's the excess money that we should use for the credit enhancement agreement to help the purchaser do something with the property?
Yeah, so it's hard to know without all the specifics, but
This is just a general question.
yeah, but that's the idea. So let's say this building is in your omnibus downtown district and someone comes forward and says, I need some assistance. That's True, so it'll involve talking with your assessor about what actual assessed value impact would result from $1 million investment. It's not always
Sure.
one-to-one, of course, but then it's, yeah, that incremental value. You would take the original assessed value for that individual parcel within the district as the base for the credit enhancement agreement. And then their increment is what you're measuring, and then whatever percentage terms you agree to for reimbursement would apply there. Oftentimes, if someone's coming forward and they're trying to make the financing work, they might be working with a lender that you can also ask, for feedback, like what is it that's going to make a difference for you in offering this loan for this project to happen, and get verification that that's really necessary. It also, some developers aren't at that level yet, and so you can't do that, but it's always good to ask those kinds of questions when they're coming
So
forward.
this is just another arrow in that quiver.
Yeah, yep, that's right. That's right, and they'll need to do their due diligence, because if what they're doing is buying a building that's already there, there's not as much available in increment, of course. Sure.
Sean, if we decided to do the downtown TIF district, and there's some construction going on now that isn't on the tax rolls yet, would that be considered if we start the TIF before that's done?
Such a good question. It depends on when the approval happens. So, because the original assessed value date, it's a very annoying definition of the statute. I don't think I'll have anyone argue with me about that, but it relates to when you vote to approve it. It's the March 31st of the prior tax year from the year in which it was approved. So if today you approved a downtown TIF district, the original assessed value date would be April 1, 2019. Because March 31st, 2020 is the last day of that April 1, 2019 tax year. So don't worry about what I just said in detail.